Suppose I should turn my mic on. Good evening. Hope everybody's doing all right tonight. Hello, Linda. Hello there over on the tubes. I see you. Oof. Hey, Peggy, how are you? Let's see. Gonna shut that down. Good evening, Queen. How are you? Good evening, Eddie. How you doing, brother? Gotta clean my glasses, otherwise I won't be able to read. Yeah, it's going to be a good night. I got a couple of fun stories picked out. They are both by the same author. Hanging on the tube tonight, eh? That's all right. Honestly, over time, I'm going to be adding more and more stuff over there to the lives, but I just can't do on the Talk Ticks. But we love TikTok, and we love the TikTok shop. That's not going to help them show my live to anybody, but you know, hey, it doesn't hurt to say it. I am all set and ready with my magic go-go juice. Hey there, Pizza Monster. How are you? Good to see you again. Yes. I have the best app. Nobody has apps like I do. I'm going to get myself in trouble. Hey, Deborah, how are you? Oh, Christine, that's totally fine. That's why we have over there on the tubes. Well, Pizza, I am glad that you are here. I'm sorry that you had a rough day, but hopefully spending a couple of hours with the goblins listening to a story will help. Hey, Michelle, how are you? Welcome in. If you guys can, please pound that like button and share and repost and all of those fun things. That helps put my face and my voice in people's ear holes. So, well, Mary Frances, wouldn't you like to know? I actually have two stories tonight. They're actually both by the same author. He is a pulp, one of the big pulp authors from the 1920s and 30s. Wrote a lot of monster fiction, a lot of horror, some science fiction stuff. Was big into the cosmic horror movement of that time that was kind of started or popularized by H.P. Lovecraft. Sarah, they did not. Neither of these, as far as I know, neither of the two stories that I'm going to be reading tonight were made into any kind of show, television show, or movie. Oh, Little Lovey. These are two pulp horror stories from the 1920s and 1930s, both by the same author. So, Sunshine, you lied. You came over here, didn't you? You just wanted to hang out with the goblins. I get it. Well, Sarah, which book do you mean? Because I haven't revealed tonight's book yet. Well, I appreciate you hanging out the chat. I know what you mean. When you said you were going to take a gummy, I was like, that might not be the best thing. Storytime with UndeadPapa. You know, I would love to so I grew up on reruns of The Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Presents and shows like that. It would make me beyond happy to be able to, introduce stories to people in that vein of, like Vincent Price or Rod Serling. They were consummate storytellers. They told stories because they loved telling stories. Yeah. Well, I'm always comfy cozy. It's just some of the things I leave you with are a little less than unsettling. But we are going to have a good night tonight. We give it about one more minute and then we're going to get started. And I think you guys are going to enjoy these stories. I certainly did when I was researching and picking them out. Yeah. Oh, both of these are going to... yeah, they're both unsettling. Yeah, Deborah, Vincent Price, huge influence on my love of telling stories. When I was a kid, my mother used to take us to the library at least once a month, if not more. And they had a big selection of vinyl records. And among that selection were a handful of Vincent Price vinyls from the 1960s, where he was basically just telling stories. And I loved them. If anybody wore them out there, it was me. I'm so happy that I actually tracked them down a few years ago and I now have them digitally, so I don't have to worry about ever wearing them out. But I've also found a collection of called The Frightened, and it was narrated by Boris Karloff, which is just yes please, Vincent Price he would always tell you the stories, but he would do so with a wink and a smirk, because he knew what he was leading you into, and he knew that you trusted him. And yeah, I love that stuff. I absolutely loved that stuff. Well, it is now 9:11 here on the East Coast, and we are going to get started. Thank you all for being here with me tonight. Hopefully we'll get some more people in here and have a nice crowd. Hey, Wings. Late. I'm late for a very important date. Off with their head. Yes, something like that. Anyway, I'm quoting Alice's Adventures in Wonderland TikTok. Don't yell at me. Am I in the Pennsylvania area? I guess depends on when you say Pennsylvania area, what do you mean? I actually live in Western New York, in Rochester, between Buffalo and Syracuse. Lily, I'm so happy you made it. I'm just getting started. Sarah, where are you listening from? Uh-huh. Upstate New York. It's funny when you get into the debate about, hey, Jasmine, when you get into the debate about what's upstate, what's Western New York, what's downstate, what's the North Country, I think people sometimes don't realize how. Oh, okay, yeah, no, that's like right on the border of between upstate and the North Country. So yeah, I know right where that is. South Jersey. I'm very sorry to hear that. No, I'm just kidding. Everybody picks on Jersey, and it's a lovely state. Linda, welcome. I'm doing all right. Should read Hank the Cow Dog. Is that like a mad scientist story, like cow dog, or is it a kid's book? Alstead, New Hampshire. Awesome. I kind of figured it was Chase. I will definitely look that up. Absolutely. I'm always in the mood for funny. No, I'm glad you enjoy it. Yeah, I pulled it off of a royalty-free music site that I have a subscription to. Wrong turn going into Philly will always put you in New Jersey. All right. Well, let's get started, and everybody else can just catch up when they get here. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Storytime with UndeadPapa. Can't even say my own name tonight. Tonight, we spend an evening with Pulp and Weird Tales author Frank Belknap Long. I have read some of his stories before, but these two I just thought would be fun. These two stories are about creatures that should not exist. Far out at sea, a damaged ship drifts into waters where something ancient is waiting beneath the surface. And along a quiet stretch of beach, a brilliant young scientist sets out to prove that the boundaries of life can be changed. Long's monsters are not simply things that hunt in the dark. They are life itself, twisted into unfamiliar shapes, driven by instincts older than fear, and entirely without conscience. So wherever you're listening from, dim the lights, sit back and relax, because Storytime is about to begin. Our first story tonight is The Ocean Leech. Oh, look, he hit the button. Long-standing joke for those of you that are just joining us or have joined us recently. Wings can tell you. I'll let her do it. All right. The Ocean Leech was originally published in Weird Tales magazine in January of 1925. Hey, Crazy Mama, how are you? I thought you would be, Wings. Hey, Yanni, how are you? How's that new job going? Well, Mama, I am sending you all kinds of love and hugs, and hopefully it gets better. I'm glad you're here with us tonight, as always. All right. I heard Bauk beating his bare fists upon the cabin door, and the wind whistling under the cracks. I objected to both and opened the door wide. Bauk came in then with a fierce rush of wind. He was a curious little man, with the sea and sky in his eyes, and he spoke in pantomime. He pointed towards the door and ran his fingers savagely through his reddish hair, and I knew that something had nearly finished him. I mean, finished him spiritually, damaged his soul, his outlook. I didn't know whether to be pleased or horrified. Buck seemed more human with his queer, vivid gestures and flaming eyes, but I couldn't imagine what he had seen up on deck. Hey, Heidi, how are you? Welcome in. Good to see you. I can't not say hi to people when they come in. Of course, I found out soon enough. The men were sitting about in idiotic groups of twos and threes, and one saluted me when I stepped out of the shadows of twisted cordage into a luminous stripe of moonlight. "Where's the bosun?" I asked. Several of the men heard my question, and they turned and stared at me and deliberately tittered. "It took the bosun," said Oscar. Oscar seldom spoke to anyone. He was tall and lean, and his jaundiced scalp was fringed by yellow hair. I distinctly recall his dark, hungry eyes and his fringe of hair glistening in the moonlight. But the rest of Oscar I can no longer visualize. He has faded into an indefinite ghost of memory. It is curious, though, how clearly I remember every other shape and incident of that amazing night. Oscar was standing by my elbow, and I turned suddenly and gripped his arm. It reassured me to grip his strong, muscular arm, but I knew that I had hurt him, for his shoulder jerked and he looked at me reproachfully. I presume Oscar wanted me to stand upon my own feet, but he made a sweeping motion with his arm to assure me that it didn't matter. The wind whistled about our ears, and the tattered sails flailed and wheezed. Sails can speak, you know. I have heard sails protest in chorus, each sail with a slightly different accent. You get to understand their conversation in time. On still mornings, it is wonderful to come up on deck and hear the sails whispering among themselves. They make gestures, too, and when they are tired, they sway pathetically against the sky. I took a turn about the deck and bawled out the men and told them to go to the devil. Then I got my pipe out and blew grotesque yellow effigies into the cold air. They danced in the moonlight and made the situation irredeemable. I came back to Oscar eventually and asked him point blank what he meant by it. But Oscar didn't answer me. He simply turned and pointed. Something white and gelatinous oozed over the rail and ran or slid for several feet along the deck. Then a larger bulk seethed out of the darkness and stood poised above the black stern post. A second object descended upon the deck, coming down with a thud and running at a tangent with the first over the smooth, polished boards. I saw two of the men get quickly to their feet, their wildish, jerky motions. I heard Oscar shout out a curt command. The thing upon the deck spread out and became broader at its base. It reared into the air, a livid appendage encircled with monstrous pink suckers. We could see the suckers loathsomely at work in the moonlight, opening and closing and opening again. We were affected by a queer, aromatic stench, and we felt an overpowering sense of physical nausea. I saw one of the men reel backward and collapse upon the boards. Then a second idiot keeled over, and a third actually advanced towards the loathsome object on his hands and knees as if fascinated. At that moment, the moon seemed to draw nearer, to actually careen down the sky and hang above the cordage. Then, suddenly, the amorphous tentacles shot forward like release hawsers and struck against the nearest mast, and I heard a splintering, a noise like thunder. The arms quivered and seemed to fly in all directions. Then they flopped back over the side. I fastened my eyes upon our black topsail mastheads and questioned Oscar in a very low voice. "Did that take the bosun?" Oscar nodded and shuffled his feet. The men on the deck whispered among themselves, and I knew intuitively that a spirit of rebellion was rife among them. And yet, even Oscar exonerated me. "Where we would have been if you hadn't brought us in there, drifting, probably rudderless and sailless. Our sails may look like skin on a waterlogged corpse, but we can use 'em. We can get the masts into shape. The lagoon looked innocent enough, and most of us were coming in here. But now they whine like yellow puppies and blame it on you. Idiots. If you just say the word..." I stopped him, for I didn't want the men to take his proposal seriously, and he spoke loud enough for them to hear. The men, I felt, were scarcely to blame under the circumstances. "How many times has that thing crawled over the sides?" I asked. 8 times, said Oscar. "It took the bosun on the 3rd trip. He shrieked and threw up his arms and turned yellow. It twined itself about his leg. It set its great pink suckers to work on him, and the rest of us could do nothing. Nothing. We tried to get him away, but you cannot imagine the sheer pull of that white arm. It oozed slime all over him and all over the deck. Then it flopped back into the water and carried him with it. After that, we were more careful. I told the men to go below, but they only glowered at me. The thing fascinates them. They sit there and deliberately wait for it to return. You saw what happened just now. The thing can strike like a cobra, and it sticks closer than a lamprey. But the idiots won't be warned. And when I think of those quivering pink suckers, I feel sorry for them and for myself." He didn't utter a sound, you understand. But he turned livid under the gills, and his tongue stuck out horribly, and just before he disappeared over the side, I noticed that his lips were all black and swollen. But as I told you, he was immersed in yellow slime, in ooze, and the life must have gone out of him almost at once. I'm sure that he didn't really suffer. Oh, with God's help, it's we who have to suffer. "Oscar," I said, "I want you to be quite frank, and if necessary, even brutal. Do you think that you can explain that thing? I don't want any wretched theories, Oscar. I want you to fashion a prop for me. Oscar, something for me to lean upon. I'm so very tired, and I haven't much authority here. Oh, yes, I'm supposed to be in command, but when there is nothing to go upon, Oscar, what can I say to them? How can I get them down into the cabin? I pity them so. What do you think it is, my friend?" "The thing is obviously a cephalopod," said Oscar, quite simply, but there was a look of shame and horror in his eyes, which I didn't like. "An octopus, Oscar?" "Perhaps, or a monstrous squid, or some hideous unclassified species." A fabric of greenish cloud covered the face of the moon, and I saw one of the men crawling on his hands and knees along the deck. Then he gave a sudden, defiant scream, ran to the rail, and held out his arms. A white exudation ran the entire length of the rail. It rose up and quivered amidst illimitable shadows, and then it poured in an abominable stream over the scuppers, and enveloped the hectic form of the wretch, and it made no sound. The poor fool tried to get away. He screamed, made shocking grimaces, fell down upon the deck, and tried to draw himself along by his hands. He pawed at the smooth, slippery surface, but the thing that had wound its tenebrous tentacles about his leg, and it pulled him. It pulled him slowly and hideously. His head struck against the scuppers, and the crimson stream, no wider than a hawser rope, ran down the deck and formed a miniature pool at Oscar's feet. A sucker fastened upon his right temple, and another got in under his shirt and set to work upon his bare chest. I tried to get to him, but Oscar held fast to my arm and would not tell me why. The body became white, slimy, changed before our eyes, and not one man stepped forward to prevent it. Suddenly, while we watched, the dead man, whose eyes already glazed, was jerked forcibly toward the scuppers again and again. But he wouldn't go through. His head was soon pounded into an unimaginable resemblance of something we didn't care to think about, and we became deadly sick. But we watched, strangely fascinated, even perhaps more than a little resentful. We were watching something brutal and incredibly alive, and we beheld it in an unrestrained exercise of all its faculties. There, under a shrouded moon, in the phosphorescent wilderness of exotic waters, we saw the law of man outraged by something mute, misshapen, blasphemous. And we saw industrious, retching matter, brainless and self-sufficient, obeying a law older than man, older than morality, older than sin. Here was life absorbing another life and doing it forcefully and without conscience, and becoming stronger and more exultant through the doing of it. But it couldn't get the body through the scuppers. It pulled and pulled and finally let go. The wind had gone down, and oddly enough, as it let go and fell back into the dead calm of water, we heard an ominous splash. We rushed forward and surrounded the body. It seemed to swim in a river of white jelly. Oscar called for something which had become necessary, and we wrapped it up decently and threw it overboard. But Oscar repeated a few words mechanically out of the little black prayer book which he imagined were appropriate. I stood and stared at the dark opening in the forecastle. I don't know to this day how I got the men through that dark opening, but I did it with Oscar's aid. I could see Oscar standing with his glistening head against the voiceless wilderness of stars. I could see him shaking his fists at the slinking cowards on the deck and shrieking out commands. Or were they insults? I know that I stepped forward and helped him. And I think I must have used my fists, for later on I discovered that my knuckles were bruised and discolored. and Oscar had bandaged them. It's queer how Oscar has faded in my memory, for I thought a great deal of him, in spite of his queer ways, and his large, hungry eyes, and his fringe of yellow hair. He helped me get the men into the forecastle, and so did Bauk. Bauk with perfectly horrified face, and with lips quivering and struggling with a vicious inarticulateness. We drove them in like sheep, but sheep often rebel and are troublesome, but we got them in, and then were turned and looked back at the gaunt masts. It's hard to say. Mastices. Swaying soullessly against the lifeless, somber regularity of calm sea and sky, at the hanging ropes and frizzled sails, and at the long moon-washed rails and the encrimsoned scuppers. We heard Bauk inside, blubbering idiotically to the men. Then something made a dreadful gurgling sound in the water, and we heard a loud splash. "It's risen again," said Oscar in a tone of despair. Part 2. I sat in my cabin reading a book. Oscar had bandaged up my hands and left, and he had promised not to disturb me. I endeavored to follow the little printed signs on the white package before me, but they called up no images, stimulated me to no response. The words did not take shape in my mind, and I did not know whether the stupid phrases that I sought to understand formed part of any essay or a short story. The title of the book itself I cannot now recall, although I think it had something to do with ships and the sea, and derelicts, and the pitfalls of over-imaginative skippers. I fancied that I could hear the water lapping against the side of the ship, and now and then a great splash. But I knew that a portion of my brain hotly repudiated both the lapping and the splash, and I assured myself that the nervous excitement under which I labored was but physical and momentary, and in no sense psychic or due to outside causes. My senses had been appalled, and I now suffered a natural reaction from the shock, but no new danger threatened me. Something pounded on the door. I got quickly to my feet, and it did not occur to me that at that moment that Oscar had promised that no one should disturb me. "What do you want?" I asked. There was no direct or satisfactory answer, but a queer gurgling noise came to me through the door, and I fancied that I could hear a quick intake of breath. A horrible, intense fear took grim possession of me. I looked at the door in white horror. It shook like broadyards in a gale. It bent inward under a terrific impact. Thud followed thud, as if some monstrous body had hurled itself forward, only to withdraw and to come back with additional momentum. I quelled an impulse to cry out, and I opened my mouth and shut it and opened it again. I ran forward to assure myself that I had really bolted the door. I fingered the bolt carelessly, and then I retreated until my back was against an opposite beam. The door bulged inwards hideously, and immediately afterwards there followed a great crash and a splintering and a sundering of wood and a retching of hinges. The door gave, fell inward, and was lifted up on the back of something white and unspeakable. Then the panel was hurled violently against the wall, and the thing under it rolled forward with terrible and increasing velocity. It was a long, gelatinous arm, an amorphous tentacle with pink suckers that slid or oozed towards me across the smooth floor. I stood with my back pressed against the beam, with only my harsh, stertorous breathing to keep it at bay. I could see that it did not fear me, that arm, and I could do nothing. It was long and white, and it slid towards me. Can I make you understand? And Oscar had bandaged my hands, and they were but feeble, fumbling instruments. And that thing was utterly intent upon its purpose, and it did not need eyes to guide it across the floor. An ungodly aromatic odor had entered the cabin with the thing, and it overpowered me almost before the tentacles seized upon me. I endeavored to slough off the great loathsome folds with my bandaged hands, but my crippled fingers sank into the jelly-like tissue as in soft mud. It was palpitating, living tissue, but it seemed to lack substantial body, and it gave horribly. It gave. My hands went right through it, and yet when it gripped me it was elastic, and it could tighten its grip. It strangled me. I felt that I could not breathe. I bent and twisted, but it had wound itself about me, and it held me, and I could do nothing. I remember that I called for Oscar. I shouted myself hoarse, and then I think I was dragged ruthlessly across the floor, through the smashed-in door and up the stairs. I remember now how my head pounded upon the stairs as we ascended. I and the thing. And I think that my scalp bled, and I know that I lost 3 teeth. I received terrible blows, cuffs from the corners of stairs, from the edges of doors, and from the smooth, hard boards of the deck itself. The thing dragged me out across the deck, and I remember that I saw the moon through the folds upon folds of obscenely bloating jelly. I was buried deep down within fatty, obscene folds that shivered and shook and palpitated in the moonlight. I no longer felt any desire to protest or to cry out, and the thought of Oscar and a possible rescue did not fill me with elation. I began to experience sensations of pleasure. How am I to describe them? A peculiar warmth pulsed through me. My limbs quivered with weird expectancy. I saw through the folds of animate jelly a great reddish sucker or disc lined with silver teeth. I saw it descend rapidly through the folds. It fastened upon my chest, and a momentary revulsion made me claw ludicrously at the nauseous tissue surrounding me. There was a kind of cruelty in the refusal of the flimsy stuff to offer any resistance. One could go on that way forever, clawing and tearing at the fatty folds and feeling them give, and yet knowing that nothing could possibly come of it. For one thing, it was utterly impossible to get a hold on the stuff. To get it between your hands and squeeze it, it simply flipped away from you. And then it rushed back and solidified. It could condense and dilate at will. Well, if you got the Jim Jams, I guess I'm doing my job. Very slimy. My feeling of horror and antipathy disappeared, and a new tide of exaltation, of warmth, of vigor surged over me. I could have wept or screamed with pleasure and genuine ecstasy. I knew that the monster was actually drawing up my blood through its fumbling, convulsive suckers. I knew that in a moment I should be drained as dry as a grilled carbonado. But I actually welcomed my inevitable dissolution. I made no effort to conceal my glee. It was frankly hilarious, though, although it seemed unjust to me that Oscar should have to explain to the men. Poor Oscar. He tied up the loosened ends of things, smoothed over the vulgar and disagreeable realities, made the raw, ungarnished facts almost acceptable, almost romantic. He was a precious, stoic, and gloriously self-reliant that I knew, and I pitied him. I distinctly recalled my last conversation with him. He was slouching along the docks with his hands in his pockets and a cigarette between his teeth. "Oscar," I said, "I didn't really suffer when that thing fastened upon me. I didn't, really. I enjoyed it." He scowled and scratched his ridiculous fringe of hair. "Then I saved you from yourself," he cried. His eyes blazed, and I saw that he wanted to knock me down. That was the last I saw of Oscar. He faded into the shadows after that, but I had kept him with me. I might have been wiser. The jelly about me seemed to increase in volume. It must have been 3 feet thick about my head, and I am sure that I saw the moon and the swaying mastheads through a prism of varying colors. Waves of blue and scarlet and purple would pass before my eyes, and a taste of salt came into my mouth. For a moment, I thought, not without a certain resentment and hurt pride, that the thing had really absorbed me, that I was a portion and parcel of that quivering, gelatinous mass. And then I saw Oscar. I saw him looming above my obscene prison house with a lighted torch in his hand. The torch, viewed through the magnifying folds of jelly, was a thing of flawless beauty. The flames shot out and appeared to cover the entire deck and to go flying up against the darkness. The cordage and the luminous rails seemed to fire, and a red and ravening serpent lengthened parallel with the scuppers. I saw Oscar clearly, and I saw the great spiral of smoke that streamed from the tails of flame, and I saw the swaying encrimsoned masts and the black, sinister opening in the forecastle. The darkness seemed to part, to let Oscar through with his torch and his stoicism. He swayed in the darkness above me, that silent, quixotic man. And I knew that Oscar could be trusted to put an end to things. I had no clear idea of what Oscar would do, but I knew that he would make some sort of brilliant and satisfying end. I was not disappointed, and when I saw Oscar bend and touch the folds of jelly with his great flaming torch, I wanted to sing or shout. The folds quivered and changed color. The maddening kaleidoscope of color passed before my eyes, a flaming scarlet and yellow and silver and green and gold. The sucker released its hold upon my chest and shot upward through the voluminous folds. A terrific stench assailed my nostrils. The odor was unbearable. I threw out my arms and fought savagely to break through, to reach the air and light and Oscar. Then I felt the heat of Oscar's touch upon my cheek, and I knew that the tissue about me was falling away and burning to shreds. I saw that it was dissolving also, turning into oil, into grease, and I felt it hotly trickling down my knees and arms and thighs. I closed my lips tight to keep from swallowing large quantities of the nauseous fluid, and I turned my face to the deck to protect my eyes from the falling fragments of sizzling tissue. The creature was literally being burnt alive, and in my heart of hearts, I pitied it. When Oscar at length helped me to my feet, I saw the last of the thing disappear over the side. Its arms were horribly charred, and the suckers were gone. And I caught a momentary glimpse of dangling frayed ends and reddish knobs and bulging protuberances. Then we heard a splash and a queer gurgling sound. We looked at the deck and saw that it was covered with greenish oil, and here and there great solid chunks of burnt tissue swam in the hideous porridge. Oscar bent and picked up one of the fragments. He turned it right side up in his hand so that the moonlight fell upon it. It contained in its 5-inch expanse a 4-inch sucker, and the sucker opened and closed while Oscar held the thing in his hand. It fell from Oscar's hand like a leaden weight and bounded into the air. Oscar kicked it overboard and looked at me. I looked away towards the black topsail masthead. So what do you guys think of that one? Hey, Sky, how are you? Hope you're doing well, kiddo. Creepy is, yeah, that's kind of what we're going, kind of what he was going for, I think. DK, welcome in, brother. How are you? Good to see you, sir. It was really good. I really like that one. Frank Belknap Long is definitely an author to check out. I have a bunch of his work, so I will definitely be reading more of his stuff. Yeah. Fun. Yeah, pizza. I totally get that because, and I think what was interesting was the fact that, he started to feel like ecstasy and joy and, I think I know that in the wild there are some creatures that the venom that they excrete causes you to feel feelings of euphoria, which kind of helps them keep you calm while they eat you. For lack of a better word. Yeah. All right. Well. So in our first story, the sea itself seemed to reach aboard and remind us how a small ship can be against something ancient. How small a ship can be. I wrote this and I can't read it. To reach aboard and remind us how small a ship can be against something ancient. and hungry. But our next story brings that same horror closer to the shore. A brilliant young scientist has found a way to alter life itself. And when ambition outgrows caution, the result is not discovery, but something monstrous. This is The Man with 1,000 Legs. Just want to make sure I got this right here. Looks like I do. Bear with me. I swear I'm prepared. So this one was published originally published in Weird Tales magazine. I'm getting there. Rush me. Hey, I did it once. You guys gotta give me credit for that. This was originally published in Weird Tales magazine in August of 1927. So these two stories are just about 100 years old. The centipede with the really awful accent. I remember that night. Those nights. 2 nights. All right. The Man with 1,000 Legs. Someone rapped loudly on the door of my bedroom. As it was past midnight and I'd been unable to sleep, the disturbance was not entirely welcome. "Who's there?" I asked. Young man what insists on being admitted, sir," replied a raucous voice of my housekeeper. "A young man, and very pale and thin he is, sir. What says he's business that won't wait. He's in bed, I says, but then he says how you're the only doctor that can help him now. He says as how he hasn't slept or ate for a week, and ain't nothing but a boy, sir." "Tell him he can come in," I replied. I slid into my dress gown and reached for a cigar. The door opened to admit a thin shaft of light and a young man so incredibly emaciated that I stared at him in horror. He was 6 feet tall and extremely broad-shouldered, but I doubt if he weighed 100 pounds. As he approached me, he staggered and leaned against the wall for support. His eyes fairly blazed. It was obvious that he was in a highly agitated state, and quite probably in desperate need of reassurance. I gently indicated a chair, and he collapsed into it. For a moment he sat and observed me. When I offered him a cigar, he brushed it aside with a gesture of contempt. "I don't smoke," he snapped. "It's the last thing I'd care to do. Nothing interferes with clear thinking quite so much as overindulgence in tobacco." "Hey, Songbird. See you sneaking in here." I hadn't found that to be particularly true, but his prejudice seemed so pronounced that arguing with him about it would have given me no pleasure. I studied him cautiously. He was apparently an extraordinary young man. His forehead was high and broad, his nose was curved like a scimitar, and his lips were so tightly compressed that only a thin line indicated his mouth. I waited for him to speak, but silence enveloped him like a rubber jacket. I shall have to break the ice somehow, I reflected. And then suddenly I heard myself asking, "You have something to tell me, some confession, perhaps, that you wish to make to me?" My question aroused him. His shoulders jerked, and he leaned forward, gripping both arms of his chair. "Yes, I have a confession. Do you know what it means to be denied the privilege of enlarging the boundaries of human knowledge when you have added a new dimension to thinking? Once the entire scientific world listened to me with respect and knew how important listening was, and now he was trembling so violently that I was obliged to lay a restraining hand on his arm. Delusions of grandeur, I thought. Emotional instability so pronounced almost always as a paranoid component. He's overcompensating for a deep-seated feeling of insecurity. When society denies a man of creative genius his birthright, he went on, let society take care. I am so afraid of what I may do that it has made me ill. A conservative course of treatment, I began. I want no treatment, he shouted. And then, in a less agitated voice, you would be surprised, perhaps, if I told you my name. Whoops. Oh, lost my place. I knew that was going to happen. You know, I was all prepared and then I messed it up. Go figure. Okay, never mind. What is your name? I asked. Arthur Saint Amand, he replied and stood up. I was so astonished that I almost dropped my cigar. I may even add that I was momentarily awed. Arthur Saint Amand. Arthur Saint Amand, he repeated. You are naturally amazed to discover that the pale, harassed, and emotionally disturbed youth you see before you was once the peer of Newton and Leonardo da Vinci. It has its grim, ironic aspects, no doubt, but the tragedy remains, like Dr. Faustus, I once looked upon the face of God, and now I am less than a schoolboy. You are still very young, I gasped. You can't be more than 24. I am 23, he said. It was precisely 3 years ago that I published my brochure on etheric vibrations. For 6 months I lived in a blaze of glory. I was the marvelous boy of the scientific world, and then that Frenchman advanced his theory. I suppose you mean Monsieur Paul Rondoli, I interrupted. I recall the sensation his starting refutation made at the time. He completely eclipsed you in popular mind, and later on the scientific world declared you a fraud. Your star set very suddenly. But it will rise again, exclaimed my young visitor. The world will discuss me again, and this time I shall not be forgotten. I shall prove my theory. I shall demonstrate that the effect of etheric vibration on single cells is to change. To change. He hesitated, and then suddenly shouted, But no! I shall tell no one I came here tonight to unburden my mind to you. At first, I thought of going to a priest. It is necessary that I should confess to someone. When my thoughts are driven in upon themselves, they become monstrous. I chose you because you are a man of intelligence and imaginative discernment, and you have heard many confessions. But I shall not discuss etheric vibrations with you. When you see it, you will understand. He turned abruptly and walked out of the room and out of my house without once looking back. I never saw him again. Diary of Thomas Shiel, novelist and short story writer. July 21st. This is my 4th day at the beach. I've already gained 3 pounds, and I'm so sunbaked that I frightened a little girl when I went swimming this morning. She was building sandcastles, and when she saw me, she dropped her shovel and ran shrieking to her mother. I suppose she thought I was a genie out of the Arabian Nights. It is pleasant here. I've almost got the evil taste of New York out of my mouth. Elsie's coming down for the weekend. July 22nd. The little girl I frightened yesterday has disappeared. The police are searching for her, and it's generally believed that she's been kidnapped. The unfortunate occurrence has depressed everyone at the beach. All bathing parties have been abandoned, and even the children sit about sad-eyed and dejected. No footprints were found on the sands near the spot where the child was last seen. July 23rd. Another child has disappeared, and this time the abductor left a clue. A young man's walking stick and hat were found near the scene of a violent struggle. The sand for yards around was stained with blood. Several mothers left the New Beach Hotel this morning with their children. July 24th. Elsie came this morning. A new crime occurred at that very moment of her arrival, and I scarcely had the heart to explain the situation to her. My paleness evidently frightened her. "What is the matter?" she asked. "You look ill." "I am ill," I replied. "I saw something dreadful on the beach this morning." "Good heavens!" she exclaimed. "Have they found one of the children?" It was a great relief to me that she had read about the children in the New York papers. "No," I said. "They didn't find the children, but they found a man with his head bashed in and all the blood had been drained from his body. And close to where he was lying, the investigators found curious little mounds of yellowish slime, of ooze. When the sunlight struck this substance, it glittered." "Has it been examined under a microscope?" asked Elsie. "They're examining it now," I explained. "We shall know the results by this evening." "God pity us all," said Elsie, and she staggered and nearly fell. I was obliged to support her as we entered the hotel. July 25th. 2 curious developments. The chemist who examined the jellyfish substance found near the body on the beach declares that it is living protoplasm, and he has sent it to the Department of Health for classification by one of their expert biologists. And a deep pool, some 8 yards in diameter, has been discovered in a rock fissure about a mile from the New Beach Hotel, which evidently harbors some queer denizens. The water in this pool is as black as ink and strongly saline. The pool is 8 or 10 feet from the ocean, but it is affected by the tides and descends a foot every night and morning. Tessa! Let's see you sneak in here. This morning, one of the guests of the hotel, a lady named Clara Phillips, had come upon the pool quite by accident, and being fascinated by its sinister appearance, had decided to sketch it. She had seated herself on the rim of the rock fissure and was in the act of sketching in several large boulders and a strip of beach when something made a curious noise beneath her. Gulp, gulp. She gave a little cry and jumped up just in time to escape a long, golden tentacle which slithered toward her over the rocks. The tentacle protruded from the very center of the pool, out of the black water, and it filled her with unutterable loathing. She stepped quickly forward and stamped on it, and her attack was so sudden that the thing was unable to flip away from her and escape back into the water. And Miss Phillips was an amazingly strong young woman. She ground the end of the tentacle into a bloody pulp with her heel. Then she turned and ran. She ran as she had not run since her prep school days. But as she raced across the soft beach, she fancied she could hear a monstrous, lumbering something pursuing her. It is to her credit that she did not look back. And this is the story of little Harry Doty. I offered him a beautiful new dime, and he told it to me gratis. I gave it in his own words. I give it in his own words. Yes, sir. I'd always knowed about that pool. I used to fish for crabs and sea cucumbers and big purple anemones in it, sir. But up until last week, I always knowed what I'd bring up. Once or twice I used to get something a bit out of the ordinary, such as a bleeding tooth shell or a headless worm with green suckers in its tail and looking like the devil on a Sunday out in a knowing looking skate what you'd glare at me, sir. But never nothing like this. I caught it on the top of its head, and it had the most human-looking eyes I ever saw. They were blue and soulless, sir. It spat at me, and it throws down my line and beats it. It beats it, sir. Then I hears it come lumbering after me over the beach. It made a funny gulping noise as if it was a licking its chops. July 26th. Elsie and I are leaving tomorrow. I'm on the verge of an emotional crack-up. Elsie stutters whenever she tries to talk. I don't blame her for stuttering, but I can't understand why she wants to talk at all after what we've seen. There are some things that can only be expressed by silence. The local chemist got a report this morning from the Board of Health. The stuff found on the beach consisted of hundreds of cells, very much like the cells that compose the human body. And yet, they weren't human cells. The biologists were completely mystified by them, and a small culture is now on its way to Washington, and another is being sent to the American Museum of Natural History. This morning, the local authorities investigated the curious black pool in the rocks. Elsie and I and most of the other vacationists were on hand to watch operations. Thomas Wilshire, a member of the New Jersey Constabulary, threw a plummet line into the pool, and we all watched it eagerly as it paid out. 100 feet, murmured Elsie as the police looked at one another in amazement. It probably went into the sea, someone explained. I don't think the pool itself is that deep. Thomas Wilshire shook his head. There's queer things in that pool, he said. I don't like the looks of it. The diver was a bristling, brave little man with some obscure nervous affliction that made him tremble violently. "You'll have to go down at once," said Wilshire. The diver shook his head and shuffled his feet. "Get him into his suit, boys," ordered Wilshire. The poor wretch was lifted bodily upon strong shoulders and transformed into a loathsome, goggle-eyed monster. In a moment he had advanced to the pool and vanished into its sinister black depths. 2 men worked vainly at the pumps, while Wilshire nodded sleepily and scratched his chin. "Wonder what he'll find," he mused. "Personally, I don't think he's got much of a chance of ever coming up. I wouldn't be in his shoes for all the gold in Fort Knox." After several minutes, the rubber tubing began to jerk violently. "The poor lad," muttered Wilshire. "I knew he didn't have a chance. Pull, boys, pull!" The tubing was rapidly pulled in. There was nothing attached to it, but the lower portion was covered with glittering golden slime. Wilshire picked up the severed end and examined it casually. "Neatly clipped," he said. "The poor devil." The rest of us looked at one another in horror. Elsie grew so pale that I thought she was about to faint. Wilshire was speaking again. "We've made one momentous discovery," he said. We crammed eagerly forward. Wilshire paused for the fraction of a second, and a faint smile of triumph curled his lips. "There's something in that pool," he finished. "Our friend's life has not been given in vain." That's kind of funny. "Dude went in and died. There's got to be something down there." Good Lord. You guys are amazing. Thank you. I had an absurd desire to punch his fat, triumphant face, and might have done so, but a scream from the others quelled the impulse. "Look!" cried Elsie. She was pointing at the black surface of the pool. It was changing color. Slowly it was assuming a reddish hue. And then a hellish something shot up and bobbed for a moment on the surface. "A human arm!" groaned Elsie, and hid her face in her hands. Wilshire whistled softly. 2 more objects joined the first, and then something round, which made Elsie stare and stare through the spaces between her fingers. "Come away," I commanded. "Come away at once." I seized her by the arm, and was in the act of forcefully leading her from the edge of that dreadful circle of still dark water, when I was arrested by a shout from Wilshire. "Look at it! Look at it!" he yelled. "That's the horrid thing! God, it isn't human!" We both turned back and stared. There are blasphemies of creation that cannot be described, and the thing which rose up to claim the escaping fragments of its dismantled prey was of that order. I remember vaguely, as in a nightmare of Tartarus, that it had long golden arms which shone and sparkled in the sunlight, and a monstrous curved beak below 2 piercing blue eyes in which I saw nothing but unutterable malice. The idea of standing there and watching it munch the fragmentary remains of the poor little diver was intolerable to me, and in spite of the loud protests of Wilshire, who wanted us, I suppose, to try and do something about it, I turned and ran, literally dragging Elsie with me. This was, as it turned out, the wisest thing that I could have done, because the thing later emerged from the pool and nearly got several vacationists. Wilshire fired at it twice with a pistol, but the thing flopped back into the water apparently unharmed and submerged triumphantly. Statement of Henry Greb, prescription druggist. You're very welcome, Lily. I'm glad you're here. Oh, thank you, Shadow, for encouraging the others to tap and share. I appreciate you very much. I usually shut up shop at about 10 o'clock, but at closing time that evening, I was leaning over the counter reading a ghost story, and it was so extremely interesting that I couldn't walk out on it. My nose was very close to the page, and I didn't notice anything that was going on about me until when I suddenly happened to look up, and there he was, standing and watching me. I appreciate you, I do. I've seen some pale people in my time. A good many people that come with prescriptions are pale. And I've seen some skinny people, but I have never seen anyone as thin and pale as the young man that stood before me. Good heavens, I said, and shut the book. The young man's lips were twisted into a sickly smile. Sorry to bother you, he says, but I'm in a bad way. I'm in desperate need of medical attention. What can I do to help you? I says. He looks at me very solemnly as if he were making up his mind whether he could trust me. This is really a case for a physician, he says. It's against the law for us to handle such cases, I told him. Suddenly, he held out his hand. I gasped. The fingers were smashed into a bloody pulp, and the blood was running down his wrist. Do something to stop the bleeding, he says. I'll see a physician later. Well, I got out some gauze and bound the hand up as best I could. See a doctor at once, I told him. Blood poisoning will set in if you're not careful. Lucky none of the bones are fractured. He nodded, and for a moment his eyes flashed. Damn that woman, he muttered. Damn her. What's that? I asked. But he had got himself together again and merely smiled. I'm all upset, he said. Didn't know just what I was saying. You must pardon me. By the way, I've got a little gash on my scalp, which you might look at. He removed his cap, and I noticed that his hair was dripping wet. He parted it, and with his hand about an inch wide, I examined it carefully. Thank you guys for the shares. Your friend wasn't very careful when he cast that plug, I says at length. I never believe in fly fishing, but when there's two in the boat, a friend of mine lost an eye that way. It was made by a fish hook, he confessed. You're something of a Sherlock Holmes, aren't you? I brushed aside his compliment with a careless gesture and turned for the bottle of carbolic acid which rested on the shelf behind me. It was then that I heard something between a growl and a gulp from the young man. I wheeled abruptly and caught him in the act of springing upon me. He was foaming at the mouth and his eyes bulged. I reached forward and seized him by the shoulders, and in a moment we engaged in a desperate struggle upon the floor. He bit and scratched and kicked at me, and I was obliged to silence him by pummeling his face. It was at that moment that I noticed a peculiar fishy odor in the room, as if a breeze from the sea had entered through the open door. For several minutes I struggled and fought and strained, and then something seemed to give suddenly beneath me. The man slipped from my grasp and made for the door. I endeavored to follow, but I stumbled over something slippery and fell flat on my face. When I got up, the young man was gone. and in my hand, I held something so weird that I could scarcely believe that it was real. Later, I flung it from me with a cry of disgust. It was a reddish, rubbery substance about 5 inches long, and its underedge was lined with little golden suckers that opened and closed when I stared at them. I was still laboring under a fearful strain when Harry Morton entered the shop. He was trembling violently, and I noticed that he gazed fearfully behind him as he approached the counter. "What's the best thing you have for highfalutin acting nerves?" he asked. "Well, there's some good new sedatives you don't have to have a prescription for," I says. "But what's the trouble with your nerves, Harry?" "Hallucinations," he groans. "Them and other things." "Tell me about it," I says. "I was leaning against the lamppost," he says, "and I sees a big, lumbering, yellowish thing walking along the street like a man. It wasn't natural, Henry. I'm not superstitious, but that there thing wasn't natural. And then it flops into the gutter and runs like a streak of lightning. It made a funny noise, too. It said, 'Gulp.'" I dissolved the sedative tablets in a glass of water and handed him the glass over the counter. "I understand, Harry," I says, "but don't go about blowing your head off. No one would believe you." Statement of Helen Bowen. I was sitting on the porch knitting when a young man... Wait a minute. There's a woman. I was sitting on the porch knitting when a young man with a bag steps in front of the house and looks up at me. "Good morning, ma'am," he says. "You have a room with a bath." "Look at the sign, young man," I says to him. "I have a nice, light room on the second floor that should suit you just fine." He comes up and smiles at me, but as soon as I saw him close, I didn't like him. He was so terribly thin, and his hand was bandaged, and he looked as if he'd been in a fight. "How much do you want for the room?" he asks. $12, I told him. I wanted to get rid of him, and I thought the high rate would scare him off. But his hands go suddenly into his pocket, and he brings out a roll of bills and begins counting them. I gets up quickly and bows politely to him and takes his grip away from him and rushes into the hall with it. I didn't want to lose a prospect like that. Cousin Hiram has a game which he plays with shells, and I knew that young man would be Cousin Hiram's oyster. I takes him upstairs and shows him the room, and he seems quite pleased with it. But when he sees the bathtub, he becomes wildly excited as a schoolboy seeing a lot of nice ripe apples on a tree he can climb. Starts acting so odd that I begins to suspect he's going out of his mind. "It's just the right size," he shouts. I hope you won't mind. Oh, good Lord. "I hope you won't mind my keeping it filled all the day. I bathe quite often, but I must have some salt to put in it. I can't bathe in fresh water." He's certainly a weird one, I thought. But I ain't complaining. It isn't often Hiram and I land a fish as rich as this one. Finally, he calms down and pushes me out of the room. "Everything's all right," he says, "but I don't want to be disturbed. When you get the salt, put it down in the hall and knock on the door. Under no circumstances must anyone enter this room." He closed the door in my face, and I heard the key grate in the lock. I didn't like it, and I didn't like the sounds that began to come from behind that door. First, I heard a great sigh as if somehow he had got something disagreeable off his chest. Then I heard a funny thing gulping sound that I didn't like. He didn't waste any time in turning on the water either. I heard a great splashing and wallowing, and then, after about 15 minutes, everything became as quiet as death. We didn't hear anything more from him until that evening, when I sent Lizzie up with the salt. And at first she tried the door, but it was locked, and she was obliged to put the bag down in the hall, but she didn't go away. She squeezed up close against the wall and waited. And after about 10 minutes, the door opened, and slowly a long, thin arm shot out and took the bag. Lizzie said that the arm was yellow and dripping wet, and the thinnest arm she had ever seen. "But he's a thin young man, Lizzie," I explains to her. "That may be," she says, "but I never saw a human being with an arm like that before." Later, along about 10 o'clock, I should say, I was sitting in the parlor sewing when I felt something wet land on my hand. I looked up, and the ceiling was dripping red. I mean just what I say. The ceiling was all moist and dripping red. I jumped up and ran into the hall. I wanted to scream, but I bit my lips until the blood begins running down my chin, and that makes me sober and determined. That young man must go, I says to myself. I can't have anything that isn't proper going on in this house. I climbs the stairs, looking as grim as death, and pounds on the young man's door. I won't stand for whatever's going on in there, I shouted. Open that door. I heard something flopping about inside, and then the young man speaking to himself in a very low voice. Its demands are insatiable. The vile, hungry beast. Why doesn't it think of something besides its stomach? I didn't want it to come then, but it doesn't need the ray now. When its appetite is aroused, it changes without the ray. God, but I had a hard time getting back, longer and longer between. Suddenly, he seemed to hear the pounding. His queer chattering stops, and I heard the key turn in the lock. The door opens ever so slightly, and his face looks out at me. He is terrible to look at. His cheeks are sunken, and there are big, horrid rings under his eyes. There is a bandage tied about his head. I want you to leave at once, I tells him. There's queer things going on here, and I can't stand for queer things. You gotta leave. He sighed and nodded. It's just as well, he says. I was thinking of going anyway. There are rats here. Rats? I gasped. But I wasn't really surprised. I knew there were rats in the house. They made life miserable for me. I was never able to get rid of them. Even the cats feared them. Tessa, this would have been a good one for you to narrate this part. I can't stand rats, he continues. I'm packing up. Clearing out now. He shuts the door in my face, and I hears him throwing his things into a bag. Then the door opens again, and he comes out on the landing. He is terribly pale, and he leans against the wall to catch himself, and then he starts descending the stairs. I watches him as he goes down, and when he reaches the first landing, he staggers and leans against the wall. Then he seems to grow shorter, and goes down the last flight 3 steps at a time. Then he makes a running leap towards the door. I never saw anyone get through a door so quick. and I begins to suspect he's done something that he's ashamed of. So I turns out and I goes into the room. When I looks at the floor, I nearly faints. It's all slippery and wet, and 7 dead rats are lying on their backs in the center of the room. And they are the palest-looking rats I've ever seen. Their noses and tails are pure white, and they looks as if they didn't have a drop of blood in them. And then I goes into the alcove and looks at the bathtub. I won't tell you what I've seen there. But you remember what I says about the ceiling downstairs? It was dripping red, and the alcove wasn't so very different. I gets out of that room as quick as I can, and shuts and locks the door, and then I goes downstairs and telephones Cousin Hiram. "Come right over, Hiram," I says. "Something terrible has been here." Statement of Walter Noyce, lighthouse keeper. I was pretty well done up. I'd been polishing the lamps all afternoon, and there were calluses on my hands as big as hens' eggs. I went up to the tower and shut myself in and got a book, and I'd been reading off and on for a week. It was a translation of the Arabian Nights, a fellow named Lang. Imaginative stuff. Like that is a great comfort to a chap when he's shut up by himself away off on the rim of the world. I always enjoyed reading about Schlessenhar and Dreyerbar and the young king of the Black Isles. Now I was reading the first part of the King of the Black Isles, and I reached the sentence, "And then the youth drew away his robe, and the Sultan perceived with horror that he was a man only to his waist, and from hence to his feet he had been changed into marble," when I happened to look towards the window. An icy south wind was driving the rain furiously against the panes, and at first I saw nothing but a translucent glitter on the wet glass, and vaguely beyond that the gleaming turmoil of dark, enormous waves. Then a dazzling and indescribable shape flattened itself against the window and blotted out this black sea and sky. I gasped and jumped up. "Monstrous squid," I muttered. "Storm must have blown it ashore. That tentacle will smash the glass if I don't do something." I reached for my slicker and hat, and in the moment I was descending the spiral stairway 3 steps at a time. Before emerging into the storm, I armed myself with a revolver and the contents of a tumbler of strong Jamaica rum. I paused for a moment in the doorway and stared about me. But from where I stood I could see nothing but the tall gray boulders fringing the southern extremity of the island, and a stretch of heaving and rolling water. The rain beat against my face, and it nearly blinded me, and a deep murmur across from the intolerable wash of the waves. Before me lay only a furious and tortured immensity. Behind my back was the warmth and security of my miniature castle, a mellow pipe and a book of valiant stories. But I couldn't ignore the menace of the loathsome shape that had pressed itself against the glass. I descended 3 short steps to the rocks and made my way rapidly toward the rear of the lighthouse. Drops of rain, more acrid than tears, ran down my cheeks and into my mouth, and dripped from the corners of my mustache. The overpowering darkness clung like a leech to my clothes. I hadn't gone 20 paces before I came upon a motionless figure. At first I saw nothing but the head and shoulders of a well-shaped man. But as I drew cautiously nearer, I collided with something that made me cry out in terror. A hideous tentacle shot out and wound itself about my leg. With a startled cry, I turned and attempted to run, but Out of the darkness leaped another slimy arm, and another. My fingers tightened on the revolver in my pocket. I whipped it out and opened fire on the writhing horrors. The report of my gun echoed from the sounding boulders. A sudden shrill scream of agony broke the quiet that followed. Then there came a voluble, passionate pleading. "Don't shoot again. Please don't. I'm done up. I was done up when I came here, and I want help. I didn't intend to harm you. By God, I didn't intend that they should attack you. But I can't control them now. They're too much for me. It's too much for me. Pity me." For a moment, I was too dazed to think, stupidly at the smoking revolver in my hand, and then my eyes sought to the ocean. Enormous waves calmed me. Slowly, I brought my eyes to bear on the thing before me. But even as I stared at it, my brain reeled again, and a deadly nausea came upon me. And then the youth drew away his robe, and the Sultan perceived that he was a man only to his waist. Yeah, Wings, unless you got a strong stomach or really enjoy horror movies, I wouldn't take Tessa's recommendations. Yep. I mean, for me, they're fine. I love that stuff, but this one's a comedy, I swear. I swear. Yeah, so was the movie Deathgasm, if you can believe that one. Several feet from where I stood, monstrous jelly spread itself loathsomely over the dripping rocks, and from its veined central mass, 1,000 tentacles descended and writhed like serpents on the head of Medusa. And growing from the middle of this obscenity was the torso and head of a naked young man. His hair was matted and covered with seaweed, and there were bloodstains upon his high white forehead. His nose was so sharp that it reminded me of a sword, and I momentarily expected to see it glitter in the dim, mysterious light. His teeth chattered so loudly that I could hear them from where I stood. And as I stared wordlessly at him, he coughed violently and foamed at the lips. "Whiskey," he muttered. "I'm all done up. I ran into a ship." I was unable to speak, but I believe I made some strange noises in my throat. The man nodded hysterically. "I knew you would understand," he muttered. "I'm up against it, but I knew you'd help me pull through. A glass of whiskey." "How did that thing get you?" I shrieked. I'd found my voice at last, and I was determined to fight my way back to sanity. "How did that thing get its loathsome coils on you?" "It didn't get me," groaned the young man. "I'm it." "You're what?" "A part of it," replied the young man. "Isn't that thing swallowing you?" I screamed at him. "Aren't you going down into its belly at this moment?" The young man sadly shook his head. "It's part of me," he said again. And then more wildly, "I must have something to give me strength. I'm all in. I was swimming on the surface, and a ship came and cut off 6 of my legs. I'm weak from loss of blood, and I can't stand." A lean hand went and brush the water from battered eyes. A few of them are still lively, he said, and I can't control them. They nearly got you, but the others are all in. I can't walk on them. With as much boldness as I could muster, I raised my revolver and advanced upon the things. I don't know what you're talking about, I cried, but I'm going to blow this monster to atoms. For heaven's sake, don't, he shrieked. That would be murder. We're a human being. A flash of scarlet fire answered him. Almost unconsciously, I had pressed upon the trigger, and now my weapon was speaking again. I'll blow it to tatters, I muttered between my teeth. The vile, crawling devil. Don't! Shrieked the young man, and then an unearthly yell came out of the darkness. I saw the thing before me quiver in all its folds. Then it suddenly rose up and towered above me. Blood spurted from its huge bloated body, and a crimson shower descended upon me. High above me, 100 feet in the air, I saw the pale, agonized face of the young man. He was screaming defiantly. He appeared to be walking on stilts. You can't kill me, he yelled. I'm stronger than I thought. I'll win out yet. I raised my revolver to fire again, but before I could take aim, the thing swept me and plunged into the sea. I was perhaps fortunate for me that I didn't attempt to follow it. My knees gave beneath, and I fell flat on my face. When I came to so far as to be able to speak, I found myself between lean white sheets, staring into the puzzled blue eyes of a government inspector. You've had a nasty time of it, lad, he said. We've had to give you stimulants. Did you have a shock of sort? Of a sort, yes, I replied. But it came out of the Arabian Nights. The Marvelous Boy. Curious manuscript found in a bottle. I was the marvelous boy. My genius amazed the world. A magnificent mind, a sublime destiny. My enemies combined to ruin me. A punctured balloon. A little box, and I put a dog under it. He changed. Jelly. Etheric vibration generates curious changes in living cells. Process starts and nothing can stop it. Growth, enormous growth, keeps sending out shoots, leg, arms, marvelous growth, human being next. Put a little girl under it. She changed. Beautiful jellyfish. It kept getting larger. Fed it mice. Then I destroyed it. So interesting. Must try it on myself. Now I know how to get back. Willpower. A child's will is too weak, but a man can get back. No actual change in cell content. A tremendous experience. I picked a deep pool where I could hide. Hunger. Saw a man on beach. The police suspected. I must be careful. Why didn't I take the body out to sea? Horrible incident. Young lady. Artist. I almost caught her. But she stamped on a leg, smashed it. Horrible pain. I certainly must be more careful. Great humiliation. Little boy hooked me, but I gave him a scare. The little devil. I glared at him, tried to catch him, but he ran too fast. I wanted to eat him. He had very red cheeks. Adults are harder to drain and digest. Of course they suspect. Little boys always babble. I wanted to eat him, but I gave them all a good scare, and I got a man. He came down after me in a diver's suit, but I got him. I took him to pieces. Then I let the fragments float up. I wanted to scare them. I think I did. They ran for their lives. The authorities are fools. I got back, but it wasn't easy. The thing fought and fought. "I, master," I said, and it gulped. It continued to gulp, and then I got back. But my hand was smashed and bleeding. That fool clerk. Why did he take so long? But he didn't know how hungry his red face made me. The thing came back without the ray. I was standing before the counter, and it came back. I sprang at him. I was lucky to get away. Terrible trouble. I can't keep it from coming back. I wake up in the night and find it spread out on the bed and all over the floor. Its arms writhe and writhe. Its demands are insatiable. Every waking moment it demands food. Sometimes it completely absorbs me. But now, as I write, the upper portion of my body is human. This afternoon I moved to furnish room near beach. Salt water has become a necessity. Changes come on more rapidly now. I can't keep it off. My will is powerless. I filled the tub with water and put in some salt. Then I wallowed in it. Great comfort, great relief. Hunger, dreadful, insatiable hunger. I am all beast, all animal. Rats. I have caught 6 rats. Delicious. Great comfort. But I've messed up the room. What if the old idiot downstairs should suspect? She does suspect, wants me to get out. I shall get out. There is only one refuge for me now. The sea. I shall go to the sea. I can't pretend I'm human anymore. I'm all animal, all beast. What a shock I must have given the old hag. I could hear her teeth chattering as she came up the stairs. All I could do to keep from springing at her. Into the sea at last. Great relief, great joy, freedom at last. A ship. I ran head-on into it, 6 arms gone. Terrible agony flopped about for hours. Land. I climbed over the rocks and collapsed. Then I managed to get back. Part of me got back. I called for help. A crazy fool came out of the lighthouse and stared at me. 5 of my tentacles sprang at him. I couldn't control them. They got him about the leg. He lost his head, got a revolver, and shot at them. I got them under control. Tremendous effort. Pleaded with him, tried to explain. He wouldn't listen. Shots. Many shots. White-hot fire in my body, in my arms and legs. Strength returned to me. I rose up and went back into the sea. I hate human beings. I am growing larger, and I shall make myself felt in the world. Arthur St. Amand. The Salmon Fisherman. Statement of William Gamwell. There were 5 of us in the boat. Jimmy Sams, Tom Snodgrass, Harry O'Brien, Bill Sampson, and myself. "Jimmy," I said, we may as well open the lunch. I'm not particularly hungry, but the salmon all have their noses stuck in the mud." "They sure ain't biting," said Jimmy. "I never seen such a bum run of the lazy critters." "Don't go complaining," Harry piped up. "We've only been here 5 hours. We were drifting toward the east shore, and I yelled to Bill to pull on the oars, but he ignored me. "We'll drift in with the shipping," I warned. "By the way, what's that queer-looking tug with a broken smokestack?" "It came in this morning," said Jim. "Looks like a rum runner to me." "They're taking an awful risk," Harry put in. "The revenue cutter's due by line any minute." "There she is now," said Bill, and pointed toward the flats. Sure enough, there was a government boat, skirting the shore and looking like a lean wasp on the warpath. "She's heading the tug off as sure as you're born," said Bill. "I'll say we're in for a hot time." "Back water," I shouted. "Do you want to get between 'em?" Tom and Bill pulled sturdily on the oars, and our boat swung out in the direction of the west shore. Then the current took us and carried us downstream. A signal flag flashed for a moment on the deck of the cutter. Jimmy translated it for us. "Stand to or we'll fire," he exclaimed. "Now let's see what that tug's got to say to that." The tug apparently decided to ignore the command. It rose on a tremulous well and plunged doggedly forward. A vast black column ascended from its broken smokestack. "They're putting on steam," cried Bill. But they haven't a chance in the world." "Not a chance," confirmed Tom. "One broadside will blow 'em to atoms." Bill stood up and clapped his hands to his ears. The rest of us were nearly deafened by the thunderous report. "What did I tell you?" shouted Tom. We looked at the tug. The smokestack was gone, and she was wallowing in a heavy swell. "That was only a single shot across her bows," said Bill. "But it did a lot of damage. Wait till they open fire with the big guns." We waited, expecting to see something interesting, but we saw something that nearly frightened us out of our shoes. Between the cutter and the tug is a gigantic yellowish obscenity shot up from the water and towered 30 feet in the air. It thrashed wildly about and made a horrible gulping noise. We could hear the frenzied shrieks of the men on the tug, and from the deck of the cutter someone yelled, "Look at it! Look at it! My God!" "Mercy in heaven!" groaned Bill. "We're in for it," sobbed Tom. For a moment the thing simply towered and vibrated between the 2 boats, and then it made for the cutter. It had at least 1,000 legs, and they waved loathsomely in the sunlight. It had a hooked beak and a great mouth that opened and closed and gulped, and it was larger than a whale. It was horribly, hideously large. It towered above the cutter, and in its swaying immensely it dwarfed the 2 boats and all the tangled shipping in the harbor. "Are we alive?" shrieked Bill. "And is that there shore really Long Island? I don't believe it. We're in the Indian Ocean or the Persian Gulf or the middle in the Hyperborean Sea. That there thing is a Jormungandar. "What's a Jormungandar?" yelled Tom. He was at one end of his rope and clutching valiantly at straws. Them things that live on the bottom of the Arctic Sea, groaned Bill. They comes up for air once in 100 years. I'll take my oath that thing's a Jormungandr. Jormungandr or not, it was apparently all of us that the monster meant to business. It was bearing down upon the cutter with incredible ferocity. The water boiled and bubbled in its wake. On the other boats, men rushed to the rails and stared wide eyes. The officers of the cutter had recovered from their momentary astonishment and were gesticulating furiously and running back and forth on the decks. 3 guns were lowered into position and directed at the onrushing horror. A little man with a gilt braid on his sleeves danced about absurdly on his toes and shouted out commands at the top of his voice. "Don't fire until you can look in his eyes," he yelled. "We can't afford to miss him. We'll give him a broadside he won't forget." "It isn't human, sir," somebody yelled. "There was nothing like it before in the world." The men aboard the tug were obviously rejoicing. Caps and pipes ascended into the air, and the decks echoed with loud shouts of triumph. We could hear the shouts as clearly as we'd been right on the tug's foredeck, joining in the celebration. "Fire!" shouted the blue-coated midget in the cutter. "Won't do 'em any good," shouted Bill, as the thunder of the guns smote our ears. "Won't do 'em any good." As it turned out, Bill was right. The tremendous discharge failed to arrest the progress of the monster. It rose like a cloud from the water and flew at the cutter like a flying fish. Furiously, it stretched forth its enormous arms and embraced the cutter. It wrenched the little vessel from the trough of the wave which it wallowed and lifted it violently into the air. Its great golden sides shone like the morning star, but red blood trickled from a gaping hole in its throat. Yet it ignored its wounds. It lifted the small steel ship into the air in its gigantic weaving arms. I shall never forget that moment. I have but to shut my eyes, and it is before me now. I see again that gigantic horror from the measureless abysses, that twisting, fantastic monstrosity from depths of blackest midnight, and in its colossal arms and legs I see a tiny ship, from whose deck 100 little men fall shrieking and screaming into the sea beneath its hideously writhing tentacles. Its glittering bulk hid the sun. It towered to the zenith, and its weaving arms twisted the cutter into a shapeless mass of glistening steel. "We're next," muttered Bill. "There ain't nothing that can save us now. A man ain't got a chance when he runs head-on against a Jormungandr." My other companions fell upon their knees, and little Harry O'Brien turned yellow under the gills. But the thing did not attack us. Instead, with a heartbreaking scream that seemed outrageously human, it sank beneath the waves, carrying with it the flattened, absurd remains of the cutter and the crushed and battered bodies of 100 men. And as it sank loathsomely from sight, the water about it flattened out into a tremorless plateau and turned the color of blood. Bill was at the oars now, shouting and cursing to encourage the rest of us. "Pull, boys," he commanded. "Let's try to make the south shore before that there fish comes up for a breath. There ain't one of us here that wants to live for the rest of his life at the bottom of the sea. There ain't one of us here what'd care to have it out with a Jormungandr." In a moment, we had swung the boat, and we were making for the shore. Men on the other ships were crying and waving to us, but we didn't stop to hand any reports. We weren't looking for anything. We weren't thinking of anything but a huge monstrosity that we would see towering and towering into the sky as long as our brains hung together in our foolish little heads. Your moongander. Your moongander? I don't know. I'll have to look it up. Which really kind of... I don't know. It's pointless at this point. Pointless at that point. Yes, sure. Whatever. News item in the Long Island Gazette. The body of a young man about 12 years old. Yeah. The body of a young man about 25 years old was found this morning on a deserted beach near Northport. The body was horribly emaciated, and the coroner, Mr. E. Thomas Bogart, discovered 3 small wounds on the young man's thigh. The edges of the wound were strained as though from gunpowder. The body scarcely weighed 100 pounds. It is thought that the youth was the victim of foul play, and inquiries are being made in the vicinity. The Box of Horror. Statement of Harry Olson. I hadn't had a thing to eat for 3 days, and I was driven to the cans. Sometimes you find something valuable in the cans, and sometimes you don't. But anyhow, I was working them systematically. I had gone up the street and down the street and hadn't found a thing for my pains except an old pair of suspenders and a tin of salmon. But when I came to the last house, I stopped and stared. Then I stretched out a lean arm and picked up the box. It was a funny-looking box, with queer glass sides and little peek holes on the side of it, and a metal compartment about 3 inches square on the back of it, and a slide underneath large enough to hold a man's hand. I looked up at the windows of the house, but there wasn't anyone watching me, so I slipped the box under my coat and made off down the street. It's something expensive, you can bet your life on that, I thought. Probably some old doctor's croaked and his widow threw the thing away without consulting anyone. This is a real scientific affair, this is, and I ought to get a week's board out of it. I wanted to examine the thing better, and so I made for a vacant lot where I wouldn't be interrupted. Once there, I sat myself down behind a signboard and took the contraption from under my coat and looked at it. Well, sir, it interested me. There was a little lever on top of it you pressed and the slide fell down and something clicked in the metal box in the back of it. And the thing lighted up. I realized at once that something was meant to go on the slide. I didn't know just what, but my curiosity was aroused. That light isn't there for nothing, I thought. This box means business. I began to wonder what would happen if something alive were put on the slide. There was a clump of bushes near where I was sitting, and I got up and made for it. And it took me some time to get what I was after, but when I caught it, I held it firmly between my thumb and forefinger so I didn't escape. And I talked to it. "Grasshopper," I said, "I haven't any grudge against you personally, but the scientific mind is no respecter of persons." The infernal varmint wriggled and covered my thumb with molasses, but I didn't let him up. I held him firmly and pushed him onto the slide. Then I turned on the lever and peeped through the holes. The poor little creature squirmed and fluttered for several minutes and then began to dissolve. He got flabbier, and soon I could see right through him. He was nothing but ooze. He began to wriggle. I dumped him on the ground, and he scurried away faster than a centipede. I'm deluding myself, I thought. I'm seeing things that never happened. Then I did a very foolish thing. I thrust my hand into the box and turned on the lever. For several moments, nothing happened, and then my hand began to get cold. I peeped through the holes, and what I saw made me scream and draw my hand out and go running about the lot like a madman. My hand was a mass of writhing, twisting snakes. Leastwise, they looked like snakes at first, but later I saw that they were soft and yellow and rubbery and much worse than snakes. But even then, I didn't altogether lose my head. Leastwise, I didn't lose it, or long, this sheer hallucination, I said to myself, and I'm going to argue myself out of it. I sat down on a big boulder and held my hand up and looked at it. It had 1,000 fingers, and they dripped, but I made myself look at them. I did some tall arguing. Snap out of it, I said. You're imagining things. I thought the fingers began to shorten and stiffen a little. You're imagining all this, I continued. It's the sheerest bunk. That box isn't anything out of the ordinary. Well, sir, you may not believe it, but I argued myself back into sanity. I argued my hand back to normal. The wriggling, twisting things got shorter and fatter and joined together, and before long I had a hand with fingers. Then I stood up and shouted. Luckily, no one heard me, and there wasn't anyone to watch me dancing about on my toes either. When I got out of breath, I picked the infernal box up and walked away with it. I made directly for the river. You've had your day, I said. You won't turn any more poor critters into jellyfish. Well, sir, I threw the vile thing into the river. But first I smashed it against the planks on the wharf until it looked like nothing on earth under the stars. And that's the end of you, I shouted as it sank. I ought to have got a medal for that. But I ain't complaining. It isn't every man has the pleasure of calling himself a disinterested benefactor of humanity. The end. Phrasing? Yeah, well. Is it the phrasing, Tessa? Or do you just have that kind of mind? I think we know what the answer is. So which one do you guys like better? Did you like the first one or the second one? Or did you hate both of them and never want to come back again because I just made you sick? Second. Yes, definitely the second. I like the second one better. Yeah. First one. Okay. All right. Reasonable. Okay. Well, I have not picked a story for Friday yet, or two stories. Yeah, you know, DK, it did not go where I thought it was going, but I kind of started to see it the first time I read it. Not something to listen to as I pick tomato worms from my tomato plants. I am terribly sorry, Danielle. Not really, but I am. But I'm not. You guys want to hear a funny story about tomatoes? So, being the age I am, when I was about 12, maybe 10 or 11, I got my first BB gun. And, of course, from my grandfather. And, Tessa, I had mac and cheese, homemade mac and cheese today. But anyway, back to my story. So my grandfather set me up with some targets. And we were, it's just, plink away. So I did just that. I plink it away, plink, plink, plink. And so he didn't make a good choice as to where to put those targets. Later, when we were getting ready for dinner, my grandmother got so freaking mad. Not that that was anything new. I mean, she'd get mad over stupid shit. But she got really mad. She yelled at my grandfather, "What in the hell is going on with these tomatoes?" So she's cutting the tomatoes up, and out of them are dropping little brass BBs. Come to find out, my grandfather and I go back out into the front yard, and we realize the mistake. He put the target up in front of the tomato greenhouse. Pulled the targets back, and there's little tiny BB holes in the side of the tomato greenhouse. I was good though. I was shooting. I hit the BBs right. I hit the tomatoes right on the target. So, yeah. So our tomatoes that night had a little bit of a mineral enhancement. Right? The freaking tomatoes had it coming. A tomato murderer! How dare you? How dare you take your grief out on the poor innocent tomatoes? Yeah. The best part about the whole thing, though, was my grandfather loved to get my grandmother riled up any chance he could. And there was debate until the day he died that that it was possible he put the targets there on purpose just to drive her nuts. Oh, boy. But, yeah, fun memories. All righty then. Well, that's where we'll leave our stories for tonight. With two visions of life pushed beyond the boundaries we understand. One, something ancient waited beneath the sea, and the other, human ambition created something that should never have lived at all. Frank Belknap Long's monsters are frightening not only because of what they are, but because they remind us how little control we may have over the forces we awaken. Thank you all for spending a little time with me around the fire tonight. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Join me again Friday and Sunday for more stories. I haven't picked them yet, but I will. And if you enjoy these stories and would like to help support what I do here, please consider becoming a superfan or heading over to the UndeadPapa Mercantile to pick up some Storytime merch. There will be more coming. I have one that's almost ready to be launched. Every bit of support helps keep the campfire lit. Until then, please be kind to each other. And be kind to yourself. Because kindness matters. And so do you. Good night, everybody.